Look around the room you are in. The chair, the screen, the cup, the floor under your feet. Almost every object you can see arrived on the back of a truck. Last year, American trucks moved 11.25 billion tons of freight and took $906 billion in revenue. That is 73% of everything this country ships. So the people driving them must be doing well. Not exactly. A driver who owns his own truck brings in somewhere between $200,000 and $350,000 a year. He takes home about $64,000. $200,000 through the business. $64,000 into his pocket. That is not a bad year, that is an average one. The reason is buried in how the money is counted. A truck only earns while it is moving, and a truck spends an enormous amount of time not moving. So how does trucking actually make money? Money enters a truck through a load. Somebody in one city has something that needs to be in another city, and they will pay to have it moved. That is the whole business, and it has been the whole business for 100 years. But almost nobody buys a truck. They buy a rate, quoted in dollars per mile. Chicago to Atlanta, 715 miles, $2.40 a mile. That is the transaction, which means the mile is the unit of everything here. Not the hour, not the delivery, not the customer, the mile. Remember that because it decides everything that follows. Most loads are not booked directly. They come through a broker who sits between the company that has the freight and the truck that will move it. The shipper pays the broker pays the truck, and the difference stays with the broker. The numbers are not hidden. On a typical dry van load, the broker charges the shipper around $2,100. He pays the truck around $1,800. $300 stays with him. Across the industry, that spread runs between 12 and 20%. The broker owns no truck, buys no fuel, and never waits at a loading dock. He is paid for knowing where the freight is. It is a very good business, and we will come back to it. And the truck usually cannot see the other side of that number. It sees the rate it is offered on a screen alongside a few hundred other loads going in roughly the same direction, which is the first thing to understand about this industry. There are about 3.5 million trucks, and almost none of them are talking to each other about price. So the driver takes the load, and the meter starts. Except it is not a meter, it is an odometer. Now follow that money out again in the order a truck actually spends it. The first bill is fuel, and it is enormous. A modern truck does around 6 miles to the gallon, and on a long run that is hundreds of gallons a week. Put a number on it. 6 miles to the gallon, 100,000 miles a year, and diesel somewhere near $4. That is a fuel bill in the region of $65,000 before anything else is paid. Then the truck itself. A new sleeper cab runs well past $150,000, and the payment arrives every month whether there is freight to haul or not. That payment is the line that ends most trucking businesses. Not because it is unaffordable in a good year, but because it does not move in a bad one. Freight rates fall, the payment does not. Then insurance, which for one truck and one driver can run $12,000 to $16,000 a year. And it is priced on the driver's record, so one bad afternoon 3 years ago is still being paid for today. Then maintenance, and this is the line that surprises people. A truck engine is built to run 1 million miles, but everything around it is not. Brakes, clutches, injectors, turbos, the air system. On a truck doing 100,000 miles a year, something is always due. Then tires. 18 of them. They wear out on a schedule you do not control, they cost several $100s each, and they get replaced when they become dangerous, not when the money is convenient. Then the paperwork that keeps the truck legal. Permits, licenses, inspections, the electronic logging device, the drug testing program, none of it moves a single box. Added up, and operating costs eat somewhere between 40 and 60% of everything the truck earns. That is before the driver has paid himself anything at all. And then there is the cost that never appears on an invoice because nobody bills anyone for it. It is called deadhead, and it means driving empty. A truck delivers in one city, and the next load is 100 miles away. Those 100 miles burn fuel, wear tires, use up the driver's legal hours, and earn nothing. Not a reduced rate. Nothing. Last year, the American trucking industry ran a record 16.7% of its miles empty. 1 mile in every 6. Put that on one truck doing 82,000 miles a year at $2.26 a mile in operating cost. 16.7% empty works out at roughly $31,000 a year. That is driving which earns absolutely nothing. And under 15% is considered good. Under 10 is excellent. So the average truck is not badly run. This is what normal looks like. Here is the part that changes how the whole industry looks. Because the driver is paid by the mile, there is one thing that costs him more than fuel, more than insurance, more than the truck payment: standing still. When a truck arrives at a warehouse to be loaded or unloaded, it waits, sometimes 10 minutes, sometimes 6 hours. The industry average, measured across millions of stops, is 119 minutes, 2 hours. Every pickup, every drop-off. And a truck typically does both in a day. Now here is the convention that makes it a mechanism rather than an inconvenience. The first 2 hours of waiting are free. That is not a law. It is simply what the industry does, and what everyone has agreed to accept. Look at those two numbers side by side. The average wait is 119 minutes. The free window is 120. The industry has priced the delay at exactly the length of the delay. So on a typical stop, the driver waits almost exactly long enough to be owed nothing at all. Across the whole industry, that unpaid time is worth about $15 billion a year. The Department of Transportation put the driver's share of it at over $1 billion in lost earnings. And when a carrier does invoice for detention past the free window, with the paperwork in order, fewer than half of those invoices get paid. Sit with that for a second. It is one of the largest costs in the industry, it is measurable, it has a name and an invoice code, and most of the time nobody pays it. Which raises the obvious question. If a warehouse keeps a truck waiting 3 hours, who pays for those 3 hours? The driver does. In time he cannot bill. On a clock that is running down his legal hours for the day, in a truck that is burning nothing and earning nothing. And this is where it stops being an annoyance and becomes a mechanism. A driver runs on 2 clocks at once. He may drive 11 hours, but he must do all of it inside a 14-hour window that starts the moment he goes on duty. The 11-hour clock pauses when he stops. The 14-hour clock does not. It runs through loading, through fuel stops, through lunch, and through every minute he spends waiting at a dock. So 4 hours of detention does not just cost him 4 hours of pay. It eats 4 hours out of the window he needed to drive in. He can finish the day with driving hours left over and no legal time left to use them. That is the part people miss. Waiting does not delay the work, it destroys the capacity to do it. That is the mechanism. A slow loading dock is not a cost to the warehouse that runs it. It is free storage, paid for by whoever is parked outside. And once you see it, the strange things stop being strange. Why drivers refuse certain shippers, why the legal hours clock feels so tight, why an industry with $900 billion of revenue cannot keep people in the seat. It is not that the pay is low, it is that a large part of the work is not counted as work. So let us take one truck through 1 year and see where the money actually goes. One owner-operator, one tractor, running long haul. He grosses $250,000. That is a serious number. It is more revenue than most small businesses in America ever see. Fuel takes the biggest bite. Then the truck payment, every month, whether he rolls or not. Then insurance. Then maintenance and tires. Then the permits and the compliance. Then the empty miles, which do not arrive as a bill but come out of the same tank. Roughly 1 mile in 6, earning nothing. And then the hours at the dock. 2 hours a stop, most of them free, none of them on the invoice. What is left at the end of the year is about $64,000. On $250,000 of revenue, he keeps about a quarter of what a lot of people assume he makes. And notice what that number is not. There is no holiday pay inside it, no employer pension, no sick leave, and no guarantee it happens again next year. It is also not evenly spread. Freight is seasonal, rates move week to week, and a truck in the workshop earns nothing while the payment carries on. $64,000 is the average of good months and months you would rather forget. So if you have ever driven past a truck and thought that looks like a business worth owning, you are not wrong. It is a real business. It is just not the one most people think they are buying. Look at it per mile instead. He is paid somewhere around $2.50 to run a mile. It costs him somewhere around $2.26 to run that mile, 24 cents. That is the gap the entire business lives inside. And the empty miles come straight out of it. Run the arithmetic on the empty miles alone. 1 mile in 6 earns nothing but costs the full $2.26. Spread across the loaded miles, that is most of the 24 cents gone before the truck has had a single bad week. Which is why two owner-operators running identical trucks, identical hours, and identical fuel prices can finish the year $20,000 apart. Not because one drove better, because one had shorter gaps between loads. Which is why a bad month is not a slow month. A bad month is a month with too many miles between loads. So who actually makes money in this industry? Start with the biggest operator in it. Knight-Swift is the largest truckload carrier in America. Thousands of trucks, enormous scale, decades of optimization, every advantage a trucking company can have. Last year, its truckload business ran an operating ratio of 97%. For every dollar it took in, it spent 97 cents. 3 cents on the dollar. That is the best resourced operator in the country, running about as well as trucking runs. So if the biggest fleet in America is working on 3 cents, the money is not in owning trucks. Look at who is standing next to the truck instead. Start with the broker. He takes the load from the shipper at one price and gives it to the truck at a lower one. The difference is his. He carries no fuel cost, no truck payment, no insurance on a tractor, no maintenance, and crucially, no empty miles. When freight slows down, he books fewer loads. When a truck slows down, it still owes the bank. Then the shippers and the receivers, and this is the one nobody names. A warehouse that keeps trucks waiting 2 hours has effectively rented storage space it never paid for. Every hour a loaded truck sits in that yard is an hour of warehousing, provided free by a small business owner who is not allowed to leave. Then the lenders and the lessors. A $150,000 tractor is usually financed, and that payment does not care about freight rates or the season or how long the dock took today. And then the large fleets. But not for the reason people assume. They do not win because they drive more cheaply, they win because they control enough freight to have a load waiting at the other end. Which is the same thing as saying they win by running fewer empty miles. Scale in trucking is not about power, it is about not driving for free. Notice what every winner has in common. None of them are paid by the mile. So the next time you are on the motorway and a truck sits in your mirror for 20 minutes, remember what you are actually looking at. That is the only part of his day that pays. He will spend around 2 hours today parked at a loading dock, watching a clock that is not running in his favor, on a bill that will probably never be sent. $900 billion of freight moved by an industry where the most expensive thing anyone does is wait. So here is the question. Is a truck driver underpaid, or is he simply not paid for most of what the job actually involves? One word in the comments. And if there is an industry you want taken apart next, name it. An industry that size, and the person who actually moves the freight is paid for exactly one part of the job. Thanks for watching. If you will never look at a loading dock the same way again, subscribe. The next one is already on the road.